Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first workshop for today for the Webfest. This workshop is on how to give good presentations, and our facilitator for today is Manuela Cirilli. Manuela, she is the section leader for medical applications at CERN and also the deputy group leader of CERN's knowledge transfer group. For you on the Zoom meeting, please stay muted during the presentation. If you have any questions for Manuela, please post them after the presentation itself. And without any further delay, I bring you Manuela. Hi, Manuela. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Hans. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with you, and me from Hans' introduction to my role. Now you wonder why I'm going to talk about good presentations. This is actually, let's say, what has become a side part of my life. It has been my career for a while. That was in science communication and journalism, in between physics and knowledge transfer. And I always had a knack for visual presentations in general, how to improve the way I was delivering my talks, whether it was for general public, but also professionally or for interviews, etc. So what I'm going to give you today is a bit of a snapshot of my knowledge around how to build good presentations, and I hope you will be able to use these tips and tricks both for the Webfest itself, for the pitches that you have to prepare, but also furthermore in your personal life and your professional life as well. So I guess I can start with my presentation. Can you see the slides? Hans, can you confirm me? Not yet. You share them. Okay. Sorry, because when I'm... Oh, they're already in slide sharing. Sorry. I restarted. Yes, they're on. Sorry. The whole point of learning to make good presentation is to avoid what used to be called the death by PowerPoint effect, substitute PowerPoint with whatever. It's just to have your audience disconnected and not listening to you. And of course, today I won't have much of the visual feedback because on Zoom it's more difficult to get this. But when you are presence of your public, I mean, it's easy to realize when your public is not following what you're saying. So today I'm going to walk you through the three main components of a presentation. No matter how short or long this is, you'll always have a content, you'll have a visual part if you're using any sort of visual support, whether it's only one picture or a full set of slides, and then the delivery. The delivery is how you give your speech and how you connect to your public in general. So the content is, of course, the main part of your presentation. You start from there. If you don't know what you want to talk about, everything else is just an empty shell. If you want, I can make your presentation as beautiful as you want, but the content has to be there, and it's up to you to decide how you deliver it. So normally, when you start thinking about a pitch, a presentation, an interview, the first thing to think about is how you structure it. And structuring means finding a way to go from A to B, which is your end point, that suits you and suits your audience as well, and suits you also the duration of the talk. So you can have a very, very linear structure of the presentation, but you can also go from the same starting point and end point, taking whatever detour you might like. Of course, if you take detours, you have to be careful about people not losing sight of what you want to tell them. So it's an art that you will learn by practicing. And also taking detours is a very nice way of enriching your presentation. But it also means that at some point you'll have to make a choice, in the sense that there are very different storytelling paths that you could take, and you will like many of them. but you cannot fit typically all of your different pathways and storytellings in one single presentation. So at some point you have to choose one path. Is like when you're writing an article, there's so many nice sentences that maybe you write, and at some point it breaks your heart, but you have to let go of some sentences or some parts of a presentation because they are not useful for the message that you want to deliver. And this actually is normally, for me, is the most painful part of preparing a presentation, is really, or writing an article, is deciding what do I leave out of here. It's painful, but it's very necessary in order to have your audience following you and listening to you. When you're preparing the content of your presentation, it's very important to know who your audience is going to be. Is this going to be general public? Is this going to be peers? Is this going to be, which happens a lot, a mix of both? How technical should you be? What's the key messages that they're waiting for you to deliver? And also, in a lot of cases, who are the other speakers? If it's an event with other speakers, what are they going to talk about? If you are in a session with many different speakers and you think that some of them might cover part of your topics, if you can, reach out to them and try to avoid that you repeat the same things all over again. Everybody will highly appreciate not hearing again what other speakers have said. Jargon, 3 letters, acronyms, and everything that we like to use in our daily life is always very, very difficult to use outside a very specific technical meeting. Of course, if you're talking with your usual team or the working group where you all know the meaning of certain words or acronyms, that's perfectly fine. But as soon as you step out into a bit of a broader audience, remember that an acronym that for you might mean something, it could have a totally different meaning for another group. So try to avoid these as much as possible, even though you are talking about your daily job, and so it's difficult sometimes to let go of this part. I hate the intro slides. I hate those slides where you have basically the index of your presentation and you're telling everyone what they already know, that you will start somewhere. You will tell them about how you did the analysis or whatever else, and then you bring to some conclusion. And even more, I mean, if you would like to have something like that too, because the presentation in particular is quite long, and you would like to have a visual guide for the audience so they know what to expect, don't go through such a slide and read it, because it's really, you are not using well the time that you have allocated. You can talk about yourself, for example, while you have the intro slide and present yourself, or just keep it all together. It's up to you, but really try not to use the first 1 or 2 minutes of your presentation to just go through such an intro slide and read it to the public, because this will set the scene in a not very positive way for you and for the audience. It's nice to tell at the beginning of a presentation, who are you, what are you going to talk about, and why this is important to the audience. The why this is important is probably the most difficult thing to say, except when you are, again, in a very technical conference or meeting. But try to think about why you're there and why these people should be listening to you. So if you're presenting, for example, pitching your idea at the end of the Webfest, is connecting to the goal of the Webfest itself and say, okay, what are we going to talk about today? What I'm going to tell you is relevant to why we are here, because of this and that, because I'm proposing a solution of this problem, because this might be relevant for you, etc. Of course, all of these very short. The intro about yourself, why you are here, and why is it important. If you have 20 minutes, you can take up to 1 minute or 2. If you have 3 minutes, it's 20 seconds basically, or something similar. And I'll tell you a bit later how, what are the tricks to make sure that you stay on time, even for very short presentations. If the presentation is longer, it's really, really important to state your topic and what you're going to talk about at the beginning, and go back to it at the end. Because if, in particular, you want to take your audience for a detour, or you're going to talk about technical details about your analysis, your work, whatever, at the end, they might have forgotten why were we listening to this in first place. So it's very, very important that at the end of the presentation, you sort of recap briefly, okay, that's why we are here, that's what I wanted to tell you, I showed you all the details, and now we wrap it all up. It might seem too much or repetitive, but repetition is really key for an audience, in particular if this audience is not familiar with the topic that you're going to talk about. Again, it's nice to give the big picture, why is it important, what is the overall purpose, and how does it relate to your audience? Why is this important precisely for them? It's nice to make it a bit personal, if you can, even when it's, sometimes you think, well, it's a very dry presentation about the work I did this summer while I was an intern in this company or in this lab. But still, you can always tell them, the hurdles that you yourself had to face while you were working on this project. An anecdote or something that was important or meaningful during the work that you did, something that would get you away, at least even for 20 seconds, for the just dry results of your work. Powerful image to keep, we'll go through the visual in a second, something that can stay with them after the presentation, a good quote that you like, or the things that you think will suit your presentation, or a visual that can really stay with them. This is always nice because people will very, very strongly remember a few keywords or a sentence or an image that they saw. Now, being funny doesn't mean that you have to tell jokes. I've seen jokes during presentation go terribly wrong. It's an art, telling jokes. You can be funny in a lot of other ways. If you feel like doing it, do it. Be aware that it's very, very difficult depending on the audience, how you do it. So remember that you don't have to be funny. You can give a very interesting presentation where people don't even laugh once, and they're still very super interested about it. But if you feel that you might want them to bring laughing, do it in a subtle way through exactly anecdotes, through saying just a little funny thing here and there, and not really straight out telling a love joke or something that in particular might be understood only by a restricted circle of people. Now, in terms of visual design, I think you see it already from my slides that I like to find images that match what I'm trying to say at the moment. It is a lot of hard work to do it, but it pays off because when you do it, in particular, if you have talks or activities that you repeat during the year, once it's done, and you have it, and you will reuse it very, very often. What would be important to avoid, in particular in non-technical presentations, is to write everything that you want to say on your slides as if it were your notes for giving the presentation, and then just reading those slides to your public. In particular, what you see very often when you are in a classroom or in a meeting room is people turning their back to the audience and facing the screen and just reading through the slides. This is really the best way to lose your audience entirely, because the speed at which you talk is not the speed at which people are reading the text in their mind. So you're still going to be on bullet number 1, typically, while your audience has already read all the points you made there. And the audience starts being disconnected from you. And you remember, what you want is the people to stay with you and not with your slides. The slides are a visual support. And visual support is really the key word in here. It's something that should help you and the audience understand what you're saying. we cannot listen and read at the same time. It's one of the two takes over the other. So this is why if you overload your slides with text, people will be just actually attracted to the text and start reading it, unless you say totally different things from what they are on the slides. And then they might be tempted to listen to you because they know that they can get to the slides afterwards. Remember also that visual communication is a way of communicating, just like words or writing. So you can find icons or images that would tell exactly what you would say in words. And this is something that you can use often, in particular for public presentations, for pitches, very short talks, to replace long bullets with just a very meaningful image. Why do we write so much text on slides? We write so much text on slides typically, in particular when it's for daily work or our regular technical meetings, because we also leave the slides as documentation. It's sort of the handouts either for the students or for our colleagues, and sometimes also because this helps our memories to remember what do we want to say. And of course, it's understandable. In a lot of cases, we don't speak our mother tongue when we're making presentations. And this, of course, is another complication to remember exactly what you wanted to say. But if you practice, you will realize that having just a bullet, an image, just something on your slides that will remind you, okay, I wanted to say this on this slide, that's enough. If you really want to be very good, you will also prepare two sets of slides, one with footnotes or something else, or a more complete one that you leave afterwards to the participants or to your colleagues with all the notes that they need from the speech. It can be your draft version where you prepare everything that you wanted to write in there, and just keep, let's say, the high-level visual presentation for the following. Remember that good design is not just about making slides pretty, but it's about helping the audience understand. There's nothing worse than people trying to figure out what are the labels on the axis of a plot, what are the units, what are you going to do, what are you trying to say. So also in a scientific context, even in a scientific context, making good design can help you being clearer and the audience following you. So in this slide, for example, you see exactly the same plot, just presented in the slides in two different ways. On the left, you see typical crop shot from a paper, and you just put it on the slide. And right, you see, well, a bit more work into that, maybe rewriting the axis on the slides, blowing the picture up so that it's more visible, and getting rid of all the text that is maybe not necessary that you can add in the notes. One of the most asked questions I get is, well, is PowerPoint a good tool or a bad tool? I use Spreadsheet, I use this other, etc. Honestly, my answer after years of giving presentations is that any tool can be either good or bad. It's not about the tool itself, it's about how you use it. And PowerPoint, you should just look at it as a tool and then see what you do with it. When I started physics, we were using this. I think the majority of you have no clue what I'm talking about. This used to be called the transparencies. So it was a really clear piece of plastic where we were going to print at the printer the plots and then adding any text by hand. So of course, was this a good or bad tool? Depends how big you print your stuff, so whether you try to have a good handwriting or not, etc. Same it was for the animations with PowerPoint. When it first started, we went all through the frenzy of using all the possible sets of animations in PowerPoint. Now it's calmed down considerably. If you're curious, at the moment, I most always use a PDF because I like to have my own fonts. I like to work on a Mac typically, and I don't want to have problems of portability when I go to a conference and I give a presentation. And I try to avoid videos unless I have the time to test everything beforehand at the meeting venue. In terms of rules for building your slides. Remember, the power of visual goes beyond only the prettiness of or the artistic side of your pictures. It also helps your audience, as I already told you. So this is a list that you can keep with you of typical mistakes to avoid in slides. Now, if I leave this list here, you won't remember any of it. You can print it out, have it on the side when you do your next slides, etc. But if I show you two small text written like this, very small, at the center of a slide, visually, you will remember this. Too many fonts. That's another slide that captures a bit the hurdle of trying not to use and be carried away by the amount of fonts that are available. So you can visually transmit messages that stay really more deeply with your audience, because an image is something very, very powerful to keep in our mind. And speaking of fonts, good rule is normally to use 2 to 3 in a given presentation. And you have, I put you here a couple, for example, resources, but there are others where you can find a lot of free fonts for use. Find yours, see which ones you like. Don't be afraid to experiment a bit. There are some unwritten rules that you can find if you browse a bit on the net. Well, some have to do really with the readability of the fonts, whether it's for a printed article or if it's for a presentation. Some have to do with let's say how a font is perceived. And there's a funny story behind the Comic Sans font that was the first default in PowerPoint when it came out, and it's considered in, if you want, in the business and the normal world outside of particle physics, as a font that you would use for, I don't know, inviting the kids to the birthday party of a 6-year-old or something like that. The meaning of fonts is really, let's say, it also has an impact on your visual. You see the same sentence here written with 2 totally different fonts, and of course here I'm taking the 2 extremes. They can really change the meaning of what you're saying. But also, exactly when it's the case for Comic Sans, you can have some unexpected drawbacks by using a certain font rather than the other. So during the presentation of the Higgs boson, well, this was not even the Higgs boson discovery, it was the talk before the discovery, the official talks here at CERN to say, well, we're still trying to find it. And of course, if you are looking at the hashtags trending on Twitter, Higgs was trending, but also Comic Sans, exactly because we used to call it a font gate at the time. You know, the communities outside the energy physics found out that physicists were using Comic Sans as if it was just a normal font, and they thought, how can you use such a silly font for a major scientific discovery? And it's just because we do not give a meaning to the fonts that we use, but other communities do. And the key message here is do some research before using your fonts, especially if you're presenting outside of your usual community, because you might have some surprises, and not always surprises that are nice. By the way, at the moment, Comic Sans has become sort of a trademark for CERN. So what was it, last week that we had the announcement of the new the update of the European strategy for particle physics, and the summary presentation to the CERN Council was made in Comic Sans as per tradition now since 10 years or so. Color choices. Well, I don't think I have to dwell too much on this. You can see it pretty well here. Pay attention. And in particular, since you will never know how the slides will read on a projector. It's one thing to have them on a computer screen. It's one thing when you have to go to a venue that maybe you don't know. Try to have a high contrast between the background and the font text. Even though in some cases it's very elegant to have something more nuanced, but the chances that this will go awry, well, they're quite high. So just if you don't have a way to test it on the actual screen, just stay on the safe side and choose a very high contrast. And again, don't use hundreds of different colors on your slides, because it might be very, very confusing for the audience. So you choose a color scheme with a few colors, and then you stick to it throughout your presentation. As I said, images are also a very, very powerful tool to use to transmit some messages and to leave something that your audience will remember. And as I said as well, it's a lot of time to go to the web, find exactly the image that you want. It happened to me sometimes that I wanted a special picture. I couldn't find anything that was really as I wanted, and then in the end I took the picture myself because it was quicker. Bullet points. This is one of the, let's see, other most asked question. Should I avoid bullet points? The answer is in general yes, and in particular nested bullet points, because, well, because they've been used for ages. They don't add anything to the readability, and actually all of these nested lists are very, very difficult for the eye to follow while people are trying to listen to a presentation. You can try and make the bullets into visual images. So this is a practical example from one of my typical presentations about medical applications, where I normally want to say that well, in particle physics, we develop tools in the fields of accelerators, detectors, and computing. And these tools find applications in, for example, cancer therapy with particles, medical imaging, and medical data analysis, etc. This is already old slides. I did something further on later, but a first attempt was to try to have, for example, a visual for the particle physics, accelerators, detectors, computing, and corresponding medical applications, particle treatment, medical images, and e-health or data analysis for medical data. For the images that you use, don't forget to always attribute them. You'll see them throughout my slides. There's always either the credits or the link where I took the picture. There are also special search engines that will tell you whether the images that you're looking for are free to use. Of course, if you look for images free to use, the area is a bit restricted, but it's good to know what type of image you're using before you use it. And if you want to use something proprietary, to ask the guys for use, if possible. Same goes for your work. If you want to share your work, I highly encourage you to use Creative Commons as a license. It's typically on all my slide sets for public. Creative Commons allows you to control how people will reuse your slides. You don't want to stop, typically you don't want to stop people from, prevent people from using your intellectual work in this case. What you would like to have is that people quote you, and in some cases, for example, maybe decide that you don't want your slides to be reworked, so that if they use a slide from your presentation, it has to be used as it is. And this is really a very, very useful tool for blogs, and all of your visual projects in general. Now, sometimes, and in particular, if you're preparing presentations, in a rush or it's a technical presentation, etc., you have to write text. There's no way out of it. You cannot translate everything into visuals, etc., and you will have long text and bullet points. What you can do still to improve your slides is to play a few tricks that can help you go from a text like this to something that is a bit cleaner. And what I did here is exactly the same content. I got rid of the bullet points, and the surprise, it still works. You don't need to have the dot in front of a line to see that one line is separate from the other. Try to avoid a lot of nested text, try to stick, if possible, to one line per sentence, because for the eye it's much easier rather than having to go back at the beginning of a line to read the continuation of the sentence, and highlight a few keywords. So even there, my advice is write your text as you would, then look at it and just simplify. It's not an article, so get rid of anything that is not useful, and transform your full sentence, into just the key messages. Everything I said about color schemes, using a few fonts, etc., translates into giving some unity to your presentation, meaning that people will look at it and think, oh, this is not a patchwork of slides, taken from 100 different presentations, which again, it happens, and we all do it from time to time, and that's very much okay. But if you're giving, the talk of your lifetime or your lifetime, you might want to look a bit more professional than that. So try to make it that your slides look as if they are from a single slide deck. And having repeated structures, fonts, colors, shapes, the way you arrange your slides, that is what it gives a sense of unity. And this is the fact that this was a presentation put together precisely for the scope of giving the presentation today. An easy way to check whether there's unity is to look at the layout of your slides in PowerPoint or whatever other tools you're using, and see if there's some slides that are sticking out because, for example, if I had a slide in orange here, you would see it immediately that it doesn't belong to the same set of slides. And this helps you to catch if there's any slide that should be really reworked a bit in the style of the presentation you're preparing. I'm not going to say much about data visualization. That's a full chapter per se, and there are professional websites, presentations you can find around the net. But data visualization is a really, really powerful tool when you have to present intricate plots, for example. So what I'm showing here, and it would be normally interactive, is a wheel that represents directories on some data disks. And normally you would hover with the mouse on each of the directories and would open up all of the subdirectories into that. There are really tons of tools, and with a bit of typically Python scripting, you can find a lot of very, very useful routines to present your data differently. I will add, actually at the end of this talk, a few references to websites that I use a lot. If you have to present data, whatever they are, even statistics, etc., and you want to get out of the usual pie charts or Lego plots or whatever, there are a lot of very good tools out there, and it might be worth exploring them. Last but not least, how do you talk to people? So you have everything done and ready, you prepare your slides. If you have slides, you have your text in mind and what you want to say. Now, how do you deliver it to the audience is the other part that is relevant to keep your audience possibly wide awake and interested in listening to you. Just following you from the beginning to the end of your presentation. Again, knowing your audience is part also of how you deliver your speech. And in this case, it means in particular knowing the venue and how many people will there be in the audience. It's very different to be in a large setting or in a small room. If it's a theater-like setting, like it happens, for example, typically for TED, TEDx talks, etc., you will most probably not see the audience because you will have the lights or the projectors in your face and the audience will be in the dark. And it's a very difficult exercise. I mean, now with all the amount of video conferences that we're having, it's actually a very good practice for this kind of situation, because you don't see the people and you have to sort of pretending that you're seeing the people and you're addressing them. Knowing the size, how many are they? If there's about 100 people, there's a chance that you can more or less see all of them. If you're talking in front of 1,000, it's a totally different number. No matter the audience, enthusiasm is something that cannot be ignored. I mean, anyone, even if they're not interested in your topic, if you're enthusiastic about it, if you go out there and try to grab them when they're listening to your talk, there's very little chances that they can just switch off and ignore it. It's just human nature. Seeing a person being enthusiastic about what they're talking about makes you curious. I mean, if this person is so interested about what they're talking, surely there must be something interesting also for me. Asking questions to the audience is always a key whenever you can. Very difficult exercise for me today, of course, but normally when I'm in the audience, when I'm giving a talk, I ask questions, even just very simple ones. You don't have to terrify your audience. They don't have to be there worried, oh gosh, she's going to ask me, for the equation or something. Is really typical questions that could be like, have you ever experienced that? How many of you did this in their life? Just raise your hands, or something. Just something that will make them not nervous, but just attentive enough, because they think, oh, they might be asking me a question next, so I better follow what's been said, because otherwise I look silly, etc. A call for action, in particular at the end of a talk, is always a nice thing to leave for people to remember. So to say, what I want you to remember for today is this, or now that you get out from this room, I would like all of you to, I don't know, think twice about using water whenever you open the faucet, or things like that. Think about something that will be at the end of your presentation, sort of a message for people to take home and to think about. Eye contact is essential. It's what is lacking enormously, of course, in these days of video conferencing. And in principle, when you're in front of the room, the advice is to look a bit at everyone in turn. Staring at someone, it can happen. It can happen because you are so focused on what you're saying, trying to remember what you're saying, and then you don't even realize it. You pick a person, you start staring at this person, and it feels super uncomfortable, both for the person and for you when you realize what you're doing. Normally, what you do is try to scan the room and move from left to right, try to make it at a slow pace. If the room is really big, you go from not only left to right, but bottom to top in a sort of wave motion with your eyes. It must look natural, which doesn't seem at all when I'm telling you, but is once again something that comes with practice and just with thinking a bit about it and how you do it. Gestures. I'm Italian, so even in front of the camera here, my hands move. You will read everything and the contrary of everything about open gesture, closed gesture. Don't stay with your arms folded because it sends a bad message, etc. In the end, it's a bit your personal style, and an open attitude is much more than just having your arms folded or crossed. So you can have an open attitude even like that. If you know that you use your hands too much and that you would like to tone it down, a very good trick is to have something in your hand, a pen, something like that you can fidget a bit while you're doing it. Careful, because I normally end up flipping it through the room, so that's also another thing to avoid, hopefully, even though it can break the ice a bit. But in the end, again, gestures, if used wisely, can be very, very helpful to underline what you're saying, and again, to keep the audience connected. A very difficult part is when you start talking, and even though you feel like, when you enter on stage in particular, if it's a particular setting, not behind the podium, etc., you have to find your balance and your positioning before you start speaking. Take these 10 seconds to do it. That's typically just because of really the way the hips are built. There's typical different positions for men and women that you feel comfortable with. Find yours. Try it at home. Do I feel better with my legs a bit apart? Do I feel better with my left foot in front, with my right, etc.? So you know which position you start from. And of course, the voice is essential. The posture is essential to have a good voice, and breathing as well. So do a bit of breathing exercises. You'll find a lot of guided exercises on the web. They help you manage your breathing. Try to speak as clearly as you can and try to keep your volume at a good level. If you're afraid of the volume that can come up of the microphone, in particular when you start speaking, you never know how the microphone is going to react to this. And a very good trick is to start talking on the exhale. So you inhale. Typically, if you do a couple of breaths before you start speaking, that will already slow down your heart rate. It's just physiology and it works like that. And then instead of talking while you are inhaling, where it's difficult to control your voice, you take a breath and you start talking while you are exhaling. It's a simple trick, but it helps you to keep the volume under control and to adjust it without jumps to what you're hearing back and the feedback that you're getting from the microphones in the room. Again, pace is what matters a lot. Partially is personal. I'm a fast speaker. I can't do that much about it. I mean, I try to do something about it when I remember. Try in particular to vary the pitch, the tone, the volume, not make it monotonous, because a monotonous speech is what kills a lot the audience. It's not so much if you are slow or fast, but really being monotonous is the killer. Try to avoid using fillers, the etc. It's natural, but each of these is a disturbance to the audience. Don't chew, seems, but I saw people coming up on stage with their chewing gum in their mouth, and I can tell you it's not, you can see midway through their talk sometimes that they remember, and it's a funny moment, but not really pleasant for everyone. And practicing is really the key word for delivering a good speech. The shorter the speech, the more I practice typically, because you really want to get everything in a little time, and you cannot afford, to go in other directions and think about different stuff and not leave out the essential messages because you're running out of time. So for me, typically, the time of practice is almost inversely proportional to the number of minutes that I have available. And I typically write my text for speeches that are less than 10 minutes. And I write it because I wanted to choose the words. I want to have the time to really clean up the talk from what I want to say. People say, well, it doesn't look natural if I repeat a speech. It depends. For me, it's not repeating, it's just knowing what I want to say. And then I don't stick necessarily exactly to what I wrote, but that's the way that I function. And each of you has to find your own way, but don't underestimate the power of practicing, because that is really what will help you be a good speaker. Just before talking, breathe, as I just said. Visualize yourself on stage and avoid simple tricks: ice water, coffee or tea, milk. Ice water and milk because they have a bad effect on your vocal cords, and beginning coffee and tea because they make you nervous. And you don't need another shot of adrenaline before an important talk. And then at the end, be ready. Your presentation will never go the way you plan it, just because, of course, the usual, the previous speaker runs late, then PowerPoint doesn't work, the video doesn't start, there's somebody who starts asking questions, etc. And then you get to the end where you still have 40 slides left and you have only 3 minutes, and okay, you try and rush through them. no matter what, remember that the audience is on your side. The audience wants to have a good talk, and they've been there, done that, have seen all this happening. They laugh with you if you take it, with a bit of sense of humor. They're not enemies. The audience is really with you every time. At the end, everything I told you today is a set of not even rules, it's advice. It's up to you what you want to take, what you want to keep, what you want to throw away. Some of the rules sometimes are made to be broken because that's your personal style. As long as, let's say, the audience is still with you, and if you have a very good feedback about your talks, it means that it works, and that's the most important thing that you can do. And remember that there is no one size fits all in terms of giving presentation, and you have to find your own style. And what I hope is that the tricks that I've been sharing with you today will help you think about how you present and find your own styles. And as a last tip, I'd like to encourage you to watch the others when you go to a conference, when you are at an event, etc. Watch the other talks and see if you like particularly a presentation or you dislike it, why? What is it that you like? And like that, you will progressively build your own identity as a good speaker. And with this, I'm finished, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Manuela. Now, for our participants here in the Zoom call, does anyone have any questions? In that case, just unmute and shoot. Any questions from our participants here in the Zoom meeting?
I can go back meantime to a question I was asked last time. I was asked how many words per minute, because I was saying that I normally, when I write my talks, I really count the number of words respect to the minutes that I have allowed. And typically in English, the number of words per minute is 120 to 150. It depends from you. You also have to learn how do you function under stress. I typically speak faster when I'm in the real-time situation, so I know I can have a bit more text than what it is. But once again, it's a matter, start from a medium value, I would say, for a first presentation, and then you work it from there.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, perhaps?
Hi, this is Samid. Sorry, I can't turn on my video right now. I just wanted to say, very nice presentation and really informative. I have a question. So usually these talks on how to give a good presentation are really helpful for us to make notes and realize what we need to do. But often during the stress of making a presentation, we forget them. So do you recommend like just either watching this video or having your own slide deck of best practices and reviewing them right before? Is that something you do, or how do you do that?
I think you have to choose your priorities and for every speech. And the priority number one, very often, and in particular, I guess for if you're talking about the Webfest, for the pitches, is time. So you say, okay, what's the first constraint that I need to satisfy? And if you know that you have to talk for only 3 minutes, that's your main goal. Your main goal is to stay within the 3 minutes and still say everything you want to say within the 3 minutes. When you go to, if you have a longer presentation, a less constrained setting, then you might set your focus onto something else. And then, as I said, is not even reviewing your slides. It's when you prepare it and you review the material, is start the preparation earlier, of course, as much as you can, because it's typical, some events you don't have that much time. It will come with practice at the end. At the beginning, I was finding really, really tedious, for example, to have to prepare, to write down text, and I was postponing it to the end. And now it's become second nature, so I do it. And you will see also which tricks work for you. For me, the priority is really the speech. Because if you give a good speech, then you can, in terms of content and in terms of what you want to say, in terms of timing, then you can get away even if the slides are a bit messy. And you have to find your own way to help you keeping your speech. I'll tell you, for example, one thing I do to sort of learn my speech or get it under my skin so it comes out naturally is not only to write it and read it, but is to have it recorded and playing in loop in my ears when it's very important. I mean, I had to give a couple of very important job interviews in the past that were really, you know, my life was depending on that, and I wanted it to go very well. I realized that I hated listening to my own registered voice. It took me ages, so I was just having the computer voice reading it, recording the file, have it on my phone, and then listening to it when I was going to work in the morning, when I was brushing my teeth, etc. for the last 3 days, and then the speech was basically with me and coming out. But it depends exactly what will work for you. But I would say pick one thing that you want to do well for the next presentation and consider yourself happy if you do that well.
Okay, thank you so much, Manuela. Unfortunately, we can't take any further questions. Our update is starting in 10 minutes. So please join our update on the YouTube stream. And once more, thank you so much, Manuela, for your great presentation.
Thank you, Hans, for the invitation. Good luck, everyone. Have a nice Sunday.
Happy hacking, everyone.